a lot of people, when we touch things, when we eat food even, right? Like our body changes as we're putting certain frequencies, certain vibrations in it. We naturally are doing that all day. All of a sudden you're not alone. All of a sudden there's permission. All of a sudden there's ease. All of a sudden, right in the moment, everything might actually be okay. My sensitive people, it's always in the gut. It's like learning how to really digest energy and how that shows up in gut health and nutrition and things like that. Because whenever people are going through those big spiritual experiences, they neglect the body, typically, is what starts to happen. If you can remember who you are, the things that aren't you naturally fall away.
How can we heal those wounds so that we don't block what we want? Xandra is a licensed therapist, psychic medium, and spiritual mentor with over 10 years of experience in the field of mental health and wellness. She is the founder of Soul Essence Center, a virtual platform that offers intuitive development, energy healing, and spiritual guidance to individuals and groups. Xandra's approach to therapy and mentorship is holistic, combining evidence-based techniques with psychology, spiritual principles, and intuitive insights. She believes in empowering her clients to tap into their inner wisdom and connect with their soul's purpose, while also providing practical tools and strategies for navigating the challenges of everyday life. Enjoy this conversation with Xandra Hawes. What are some techniques or practices that individuals can use to develop their own intuition?
Oh, my brain goes into like major therapist mode and like all along the spectrum with it. I think I think there's so many different definitions about what intuition is and also like where it is in the body too. So if we start off just like the definition of like intuition, I think in a lot of times for me, intuition has to do with like a deep inherent knowing that like comes from the soul. It's sort of like our deep, I like knowing with a capital K, basically, that we sort of sit in. And so if someone's like spiritually evolving, learning how to sit deeply in their spirituality and trust those things, practices oftentimes that are really popular have to do with meditation or energy work or things of that nature, because a lot of it is releasing energy. It's helping people learn how to really let go of some of the what I call the sticky peanut butter energy in our world that gets stuck on us, especially for my empaths and sensitive people. They sort of walk through the world kind of tasting all these different energy frequencies, and sometimes they end up matching them on accident. And it becomes really hard of like, what's me and what's another person? And so what I always tell folks, if you're trying to learn how to tap into intuition and you're trying to trust that spiritual growth process, usually people that are empathic and sensitive start off thinking their sensitivity is a burden because they're like, oh, I match the energy of people or I take things on. But on the other side of the spectrum, you can heal yourself faster because you can also tap into frequencies easier than other people can when you're sensitive. So a lot of it is retraining of like, what do I want to tap into, right? So for an example, yesterday I had a really, really heavy client load and some people were really struggling. And I was sitting there just like, whoo, okay, just sat in some really big things with people. But I know myself so well that I'm like, great, what frequency would I rather tap into right now? What can I do to kind of like lighten my space and come back into my own being? And so as a sensitive person, this might sound silly, but I can literally close my eyes, take a couple breaths, and sit with one of my plants and just match the frequency of this neutral, loving, grounded, embodied plant being or this plant spirit. And all of a sudden, my whole energy shifts, and I'm like, okay, there I am. I just matched the energy of something. And so sensitive, empathic people are so used to not knowing what energy is theirs or not because they're matching the frequencies of things on accident. And so on the other side of the spectrum, on the more positive, it's being more aware of what you're matching and deciding, especially with nature, especially if you tend to have spiritual practices, or a lot of people, I live in Colorado, go to nature to be outside. Some of the practices are just plugging yourself back into joy, ease, neutrality, love. sort of these things. And so those are easy ways to kind of plug in and plug out of certain frequencies. And by doing that, you are reminded of who you actually are. A lot of times when people are on the spiritual journey and trusting themselves, a lot of times it's remembering who you are. And I come from a Buddhist background that believes at the core of who we are brilliant sanity, we are basic goodness, we're a soul, essentially. And so a lot of it is plugging in and remembering who you are. And so it's not only releasing energy. I teach a lot of energy releasing classes on like how do I let energy go, but it's also making sure that you're replenishing and you're plugging yourself in at the same time versus just letting go of things.
Okay. How can you match the vibration of something else that's higher than the vibration that you're currently at?
Ah, I wish I had a quantum physics person with me to like go into the sciencey aspects of it, but I can only speak from my experience, but a lot of people are gifted with like clairsentience or like the ability to hold a rock, right? Or some people are really into crystals or things. They hold it and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I feel something. Maybe my hands start buzzing. Maybe all of a sudden there's a light or like an openness that starts to happen. And so naturally, when we hold things, a lot of people, when we touch things, when we eat food, even, right? Like our body changes as we're putting certain frequencies, certain vibrations in it. We naturally are doing that all day, changing our states. Even in the car, we change brainwave states sometimes as well. So by interacting with our environment, we're sort of changing all the time. But I don't think a lot of people have, how do I say this, felt empowered in it around like, what would allow me to shift my frequency? What would allow me to come into my joy right now? Like an easy one people use is music, right? You can use that for better or for worse. I don't really listen to the radio anymore because I'm like, I just feel sad when I'm
Mhm.
listening to most songs. But a lot of people are choosing to interact with different objects, different frequencies, things like that. But a lot of times it's not from this empowered way. So, from my experience, being very, very sensitive, but feeling very connected in nature, it's easy for me to hold something with clairsentience. And all of a sudden, if I breathe and I give permission to myself to really receive the energies of plants, things like that, all of a sudden my whole nervous system will start shifting. All of a sudden it becomes very attuned to these little things that maybe I was unconscious to. So sometimes it's going slow. Sometimes being able to tap into these things, we have to go a little bit slower. A lot of people really want to change states and how they feel, which is why like drugs and alcohol and certain like really strong substances, they change people's states really fast. So we go to them because we want immediate gratification. And sometimes allowing the body to shift or even learning energy work is becoming more aware of the subtle differences and staying long enough in those states to understand what's happening. I think this is why meditation is growing. It's the slow road for a lot of people, but it has some big benefits when you start slowing down and actually moment to moment becoming aware of what's happening. And as you become more aware of that, the energies around you, you allow them to heal you more. You start slowing down and recognizing, whoa, we are interconnected here. I totally thought I was alone right now, but if I slow down and I actually am with this object, all of a sudden this interconnection starts to happen and you can match the frequencies. And all of a sudden you're not alone. All of a sudden there's permission. All of a sudden there's ease. All of a sudden, right in the moment, everything might actually be okay.
So having that self-awareness and that intention in your mind that you want to feel better or you want to increase your frequency is, I mean, that's the only way to really go about it, right? It's like you have to be aware.
Mhm. It's true. I'm a big fan of like, if you can see it, you can heal it. So
Mhm.
it's like if you can really hold awareness around things and intentionally say, like, wow, I can see this now and I want to heal this now. I tend to be a person that believes the universe is always trying to bring us more of what we want. But if we're not clear on what we want, it's kind of like sitting at a restaurant and like ordering a salad and then you're like, no, 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 maybe I want the soup. And then you call the waitress back and then you're like, I want the soup. And you keep ordering different things. You're not clear. You don't let the universe carry it out. You start getting all of these mixed messages because the universe is like, well, you wanted salad. Oh, wait, no, we wanted soup. Oh, wait, no, we wanted this. Wait, what do you want? And then we end up getting like not a clear idea. So I think a lot of that is also related to worthiness of like when we know that we're worthy of healing, when we know that we are worthy of asking for what we want, we also can take in healing at a higher rate. A lot of us, in my experience as a therapist, actually block healing energies. We actually don't allow certain things in out of fear, out of protection, out of a sense of not feeling enough. In a lot of ways, it seems to be the core wound I see in like the coaching world, but also in the psychic world and therapy. There's a massive overlap of that. So we block the natural healing capacities of the body, of people that love us, just all on accident. So a lot of it's becoming, like you're saying, more aware, but creating that intention of, I want to be more aware of what's available to me. And I don't want to turn it down out of fear. I don't want to block it out of fear.
How can we heal those wounds so that we don't block what we want?
That's a big question, and I love it. I love it. I love it. So you said, how do we not block? Can you say it again? There was a certain frequency to it. I'm downloading it.
How can we heal those wounds so that we don't block the things that we want?
Yeah. Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is if you can imagine like almost like an accordion fold like started happening in my brain, and it was like all of these pages and chapters of all the different amazing modalities that are starting to come out there. I'm writing a blog right now on the difference between therapy and coaching, and it starts off with how happy I am that literally as people are going through their healing process and becoming so aware of opportunities to heal that they're like, oh my gosh, I can coach people in this. I can help people not go through this in a different way. And so I love that like our world is bursting at the seams of people healing themselves, and all of these different coaches and therapists and healers and channelers and body workers or whatever it is using the wounded healer journey to sort of put that medicine out there. And I think the most difficult part I see is like, because there's so many roads to healing, it seems like so many people are like, what's the best route? Like, what's the best way to heal? How do we overcome those wounds of not being enough? And so, what I would say in my experience is that I don't know if there's one particular road that's like the best or the most perfect out of all. And even like in the therapy realm, if my little corner of the world, sometimes when people are coming in for consultations, they'll say, like, what's the best healing modality in therapy? Like there's all of these different ones. Like, what's the best one? And I always highlight there was a study that was done years ago, and they were trying to figure that out. They were like, what therapy is going to be the best? And so they interviewed people that felt like going to therapy was successful. And so after interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people, what they came up with the results, which I think are hysterical in some ways, but the major findings essentially were it's the quality of the relationship that actually was the most important factor in that person feeling like healing was happening. Some people couldn't even name the modality, whether it was like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical or somatic work or whatever. It was that person, that trust, that like connection, that relationship. And so what I've found, I've studied with so many different teachers and gotten on the healing train where it feels like healing yourself is like digging a hole to China. You're like, okay, we got to get to this layer. Okay, right? You understand this. I have to get to this layer. I have to heal this, right? And what I have found is that there's all these different layers that we're working on, and there's all these different teachers and opportunities. And I don't know if there's a perfect path or if there's a perfect way of healing. And this is, I think, where intuition comes in, because some of us, depending on our families, depending on ancestral trauma, depending on the bodies that we come into, like where we're standing in terms of how we identify and, all these different aspects of ourselves, we're working on different healing mechanisms. And so I always tell folks, really trust your gut when you're looking to heal yourself, or if you have this core wound of like, I don't feel enough and it's causing me to block my own healing. When you start searching, it's really feeling into, can I trust as much as I can the person that I'm working with? Because the more trust you have, the more the body lets in healing. And oftentimes, the person that you're working with is holding a particular healing pattern in themselves. They're holding all of that knowledge in themselves. And so teachers are like lighthouses. And when you find a teacher that you aligned with, or a coach or a therapist or whatever, what happens when they're a lighthouse is it gives you the opportunity to match that energy that they're holding as well. And so if you're open, if you're available to healing, you're going to be able to match that energy, and you're going to be able to run that energy through your body. That's when all the aha moments start coming in. So it's a big answer to your question. I haven't found that there's one particular path. I wanted there to be one. I started on this journey when I was 15 just because of a really kind of traumatic spiritual experience. And I had that in line of like, oh, I need to find like the perfect right thing. And I feel like my ego has loved it. It's like, oh, this is the thing, da da da, that's gonna like heal me, and then they'll never be suffering again. And as I've gotten older and older, I'm just like, oh wow, it's less about, it's like, it's being able to let the energy run through you while it's happening versus finding the perfect thing. I think one of my brilliant teachers who's retired now, every time I talk to her, I find out she's done another modality. And I'm like, you did this? She's like, yeah, just another grain of rice in the rice jar. And it's just like this sweet, silly thing of like, yeah, okay, okay. Every healing thing you do is a layer, and it becomes more about sitting in your own self-worth and love and trusting your intuition for whatever healing layer you're working on. I don't know about you, but I haven't found one particular modality where it completely cleared everything yet. I would love for there to be one, but it always feels like it's in layers. Do you have that experience as well?
Yes, and I was actually just thinking, like there's not one way. I mean, even my background has a lot to do with nutrition. So I learned by trying 100 different diets that there's not one diet. There's not one diet for everyone. There's not even one diet for a person for their whole life. It's going to change. And I think that goes even for successful relationships or marriages. It's not like there's a blueprint for a successful relationship. Like, don't kiss on the first date, or don't sleep with the person for, 2 months, or whatever rules that you hear from whatever expert. It doesn't matter, because you're always going to find people who broke that rule or that guideline, that have been together, 50 years, 60 years. And I think I don't think there is a one size fits all. And yeah, I think it is really tapping into your intuition. And I think it's a lot of trial and error. But I mean, that's from my experience, is what I've found. And it feels like a waste of time sometimes, because it's like you just want to get to the things that work, and you kind of have to learn to enjoy testing out different, I don't know, different modalities, practices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 100%. 100%. Yeah, yeah. There seems to be something, maybe it's the way like we're advertised to, right? Of like, do this in 3 minutes and this, then you're going to get this like perfect result, right? Our like society creating this dichotomy of like, you're either really bad or you're healed if you do this. It's just 3 steps. Like it seems like we're programmed to kind of be more of like the sprinter versus like the marathon aspect of the self. And I like wonder if we had inherent trust, if we like really believed that we were enough at the core and that we were worthy, I wonder if there would be less like intensity about finding the perfect thing and it would be more fun. It would be like, ooh, I know I'm enough. Like this might be fun over here. And then if it didn't work, we'd be like, okay, cool. I learned something. Like I can go over here versus this like very dramatic, like, no, I didn't find the perfect thing that like got me out of this. I wonder if we can like calm down a little bit, even though our world is going really, really fast. Like there's a way to like come center and like enjoy the process a little bit. It
Mm.
reminds me there was a dear friend and we were asking a bunch of people in our group like why are you here? Like why do you think you've come to earth? And this is from a Buddhist like multiple life perspective, but like why do you think you've chosen this? And everyone had these like really intricate answers. And then my friend's partner who's just incredible and like a tech person, so I was like okay, I'm waiting, he's not very wooey or spiritual. So I was like wondering why he thought he was here. And he just said to enjoy, to be in joy, like to enjoy. And it was the most profound answer of all these like therapists and healers that, like needed a whole paper to describe why they were here. It's just a sweet sentence. And I was like, wow, look at that like compassionate sword just like kind of cutting through of like, could we approach healing with joy? And would it actually be more fun and like work more if we weren't these like never ending projects of trying to get where we need to be in some way?
Hmm. Oh my gosh, that is so good. And I'm so on board with that answer because I was one of those people trying to search for, the meaning of life and the meaning of this life for me. And my most recent, and I'm sure it will change and evolve too, my thinking around it, but was just to experience our senses. We get to be in these bodies and we get to, enjoy the seeing, the tasting, the touching, everything that we don't get to have when we don't have a human body. And I mean, maybe I'm sure there's nuances inside of each lifetime of why we're here, why we wanted to be this particular person and be in this situation or in this whether you're a female or a male or you live in the US or Africa or whatever lifetime you chose. I'm sure there's other reasons for each of those specifics, but overall, yeah, I mean, we get to experience all of our senses, which is we take for granted, every day. At least I do.
Mm, hmm. I appreciate you saying that. Like to really be embodied is to like recognize that we're in a body, and you think that would be somewhat basic, but it seems like most of us are like trying to get back in through the body, that the healing is in and through the body, not outside of it in some ways too. But it seems like the body becomes this like never ending project, and it's just like so loving, just like so in present time with us, just like this huge microphone like listening to us, like operating in present time. It's like the most, I'm sure you can speak miles and miles on it because of your background and like what you teach with people, but at least for me, like it's been this process of like coming down into the body. And of course all therapists have therapists, and so I have a somatic therapist that won't even let me talk. She's like, shh, go down, go in. Like we don't need you to be in your head anymore, like let's just like go down and in. So I'm also on board for being in joy like in the body and having like deep friendship sort of with it. It seems like part of like really coming home is like coming home to the body in a big way too. And it's very hard. I think I'd be curious what you think about this, but it feels like our world sometimes, at least in the past, is like put spirituality on this pedestal of like getting away from the body. Like, oh, these like this is like the human body. This is the thing to like disregard or like not listen to. And like embodied spirituality feels like a whole other surge of like in and through, and like recognizing its magic as you're opening to intuition, like as you're aligning sort of with higher self or your soul essence or whatever people call it too. So I'm noticing a bigger trend in that. I'm so curious what's on the other side as well.
What is a spiritual emergency and how can individuals recognize if they are experiencing one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think Spiritual emergency, I believe, I'm trying to think what era it was coined in. I think it's in the 1970s, maybe 80s, by a man named Ed Podville. And he, in Colorado, where I did my master's degree, it's a very like Buddhist inspired like take on like psychology and has a lot of spirituality within it. And so spiritual emergencies from like Ed Podville's perspective are essentially when you are going through a spiritual awakening, you start sensing, feeling, recognizing that spiritual essence within the self. Mania can actually start to happen for some people. There can be sort of this manic, there can be certain symptoms or signs that start to happen that kind of look like a spiritual awakening. And I think if you were to type in spiritual awakening in Google, a lot of it is like emotional challenges, relationships or careers ending, or just a lot of transformation and change. But like a spiritual emergency is a little bit higher on a mental health level. And so, again, a lot of it is characterized by like really grandiose thinking, by sort of this like really fast paced energy. Again, a lot of it can like mimic mania. Or either some symptoms of like bipolar. There can be like hallucinations involved. There can be, as like the spirit is kind of coming online in the body, there is this like, wow, massive download. And so it's a spirit, right? Your spiritual sense is emerging into the body, but it feels like an emergency because it, a lot of times it's very difficult for people to function in their daily lives when this is happening. Like maybe they're just feeling so much that they're like, wow, I'm so overwhelmed and it's really hard for me to be present and I'm feeling like I can't drive my car. Or sometimes people will have kind of bigger spiritual downloads. Like with mania, there can be this fixation on like numbers or patterns. So maybe you wake up and you look over and the clock says 333 and you're like, oh, someone who's a little bit more grounded in might look over and be like, oh, in numerology, what does this mean? Or are they angel numbers, right? Or they might have this, but someone who's maybe going through a spiritual emergency might be like, oh, 333, and that relates to triangles, and those are connected with the pyramids, and the pyramids are connected to my past life, and they'll be like this like kind of thing, and it'll feel really big and intense, and all of a sudden you might be like, this is again an example, like, oh wow, like I need to look for all the triangles today, and maybe I should sit out and meditate next to the flowers that have triangle cones on them. And there can be this like, you can kind of feel the energy of it, right? So
Mhm.
spiritual emergencies are when the spirit is like emerging through the body and the ego is trying to grasp and control what's going on. And so it tries to create this like really important story about what's happening and it tries to control it. And this is sometimes where people think they're Jesus as well, which I have so much love for because sometimes when I've like worked in the past with people going through these things, I have to like sit with them and be like, I just want you to know it's not that I don't think you're not Jesus. It's that everyone else is also Jesus. Like that, like plant, everyone else. Like, can we, instead of making this like Gollum, like I'm really special, like this is so special what you're going through. And of course, it feels really holy and really beautiful. Like you're connecting with your spirit. That's awesome. But there's a way that the ego grasps on to that spirituality and tries to own it. And it's literally like Gollum energy. It's like, I'm this and
What's
I'm
Gollum?
that. Oh, Gollum, like in Lord of the Rings. Have you ever seen the movie Lord of the Rings at all? Okay. So there's a character very well known in the Lord of the Rings trilogy that's almost like this like I don't know what you would call him, like a like a goblin or like a troll kind of thing. And his whole thing is that he is obsessed with the ring in Lord of the Rings. And he spends his whole like hundreds of years protecting this ring. And there's a quote that's like the precious, this is my like special thing. And so sometimes I use it as an example. I'm trying to think if there's like another way. There can be a way that our ego basically tries to own and makes us really, really special, basically out of fear. And there can be this like grasping onto the energy. And then the brain makes up a pattern that, like, well, I'm Jesus and I'm this. I'm trying to think like when I was working with elders, I used to manage like 24/7 care teams from like a Buddhist psychology based like elders organization. And one person, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so he was actually in a memory care facility where it had to be locked because he wasn't harmless in any way, but he would wander and he would go places and they couldn't put boundaries down. And so I would actually pick him up and we would drive to some really beautiful places in the mountains. And he was obsessed with coffee. And so we would go and he loved waffles. So we'd like go get waffles together and we would sit across the table and he would talk about our past lives together. He was like, "You were Mary and I was Jesus." And he would like be talking to me and he would say things where he wasn't necessarily wrong. Like he would be like, "I can see auras and your aura is purple and I can see auras." And I'm like, "Great, it's true. It is purple. That's awesome that you're picking up on that." But like he would go into these stories based off of, well, I'm this important and you're this. And so he would go into this like whole story that he was accessing based off of his feeling of spiritual. His brain would sort of take it and mold it and think certain things. And I don't want to down him. Who knows? I wouldn't want to take on the role of being Mary in a previous life. But this is sort of an example when people are going through spiritual emergencies and they can go really extreme. The example I'm giving you is very, very extreme. But a spiritual emergency can literally be like someone having severe panic attacks for a week, right? And maybe they're starting to question everything in their life. Maybe they're, a lot of times spiritual emergencies are spurred on after a traumatic incident. So that could be a parent dying. That could be a big career change. That could be having a baby and bringing it into life. That could be having an illness. A lot of people will go through spiritual emergencies. The spirit starts emerging when kind of like a wound actually opens and the spirit kind of like comes through. So this is, again, I'm giving you an example, but when those things are happening, it's really hard for them not to get pathologized. To be honest, sometimes people get put on medications, and I'm not against medications if that's what people want. I know you're in this camp too of like how to do things naturally rather than like necessarily like getting certain things involved in the system if they don't have to be. And so I always tell folks if they're going through a spiritual emergency, finding a holistic therapist that understands trauma, mental health, and kind of can hold that and kind of bring, even if certain medications have to be brought on board, whether it's long term or temporarily, it's also bringing in someone that can hold that holistic perspective and get supplements on board and is looking at nutrition and like how can we support the body, or getting adaptogens on board to work with stress, like things of that nature. So again, a little bit of a long answer here on the spiritual emergency piece, but it's a little bit, it's like spiritual awakening is like the smaller version, and then spiritual emergency tends to be the one where people really need to get more clinical mental health work that is holistic and not pathologized, so that the person can really ride through the spiritual opening and learn how to like ground it in without causing any accidental harm to the self or to other people.
That was going to be my next question, is how can someone integrate a spiritual emergency or experience like that in like a healthy and balanced way?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To be honest with you, it looks so different. I have had people that are going through something big. Again, these folks had a lot of resources, but it was, like it was a mom that ended up like, whoa, going through a huge spiritual emergence. And she was like, we are everything, we are interconnected, and like, I can't live my normal life anymore. And so we were like, whoa, okay, she's like up really, really high right now. She's like through the ethers, like she's not in her body, right? So a big thing like for us was the family reached out and it's like, okay, for the next like week or so, we're going to have care professionals that are like with her and like staying with her and like grounding, helping her eat food, helping her manage herself. And it took about a week of having just we would call like a Buddhist sort of caregiver, just to kind of be there and hold space. Whether she was sleeping, they would just sit by her bed and read. Whether it was like going for walks together, but it's just being that grounding presence, making sure she's eating, making sure she's drinking water, because whenever people are going through those big spiritual experiences, they neglect the body, typically, is what starts to happen. And so it was like helping her meditate, helping her write, helping her like have a daily schedule with those things. And so it was like just a week long experience where she started coming back into the body, and that worked really well. A lot of times if someone's coming to me and if they're having something like this, we get the family on board. So I'll say like, hey, let's have you and your husband like sit together and let's talk about like how we can work with this. Because sometimes when people's spiritual energy is coming through, they're really trying to trust their intuition, and that can cause a lot of like difficulties in a relationship where if someone's like, my intuition says this, and like their partner doesn't agree, there can be a lot of arguments that start to happen about how to invest in certain things or raise kiddos or like even going out to dinner as something basic. Right, my intuition says we should go here, well I want to eat this, and like it can show up in like, you know, silly ways, things like that. And then there are some people that literally need inpatient. In Colorado, in Boulder, I have amazing people that I went to school with that work in the crisis centers and things like that, and are very diagnostic related, where they're able to like see what's happening, but they also hold a holistic perspective of like assessing, is this person a danger to themselves? Because there are these sad stories where people go through spiritual awakenings and they're like, I'm going to jump off this cliff. So whenever someone is like having those episodes or things are coming through, it is never a bad idea to find a crisis line and reach out and have someone kind of assess, like, are you having these thoughts? Like, is this happening? Like, do you feel safe in your body? Is there something, you know, do you feel like you have control over your decision making right now? How is your vision, right? Just like checking in on all of those pieces. Sometimes people end up going to the emergency room. And to be honest with you, a majority of the time, if people go straight to the emergency room, they're looking at your vitals. They're like kind of looking more at like, how is the body happening? And not every hospital is trained to be able to work with those things, or mental health. Sometimes they end up like having to do holds on people and things like that. So I always tell folks, finding a crisis line is the best thing to do, so that someone can give you feedback on like where to go and what to do if it's happening, and they're going to help you assess those things. But it's a case by case basis depending on like how dramatic it is. And again, the more resources someone has, the more they might be able to like stay in home. Again, I don't say this to scare people, because very few people actually go through like this level. It's more like emotional, it's more like questioning who you are, which I mean is not easy, right? Questioning who you are, your purpose in life, those are basic spiritual awakening things. But the emergency is like when functioning really goes out the window in like a big way. And these are ways that it shows up for different people. And depending how supportive your family is, or depending how supportive your friends are, I have seen people band together and do a great job where someone takes, you know, several days off work and a friend comes over and eats dinner with them. And it's just like, I'm okay, but I just need to like have time and space to be with this, to cry, to move things through. And sometimes it doesn't take that long for people as well. It's more so about not going into fear. And it's really hard not to go into fear when this is happening, because it's so new for a lot of people. They've never experienced anything like this before, and fear always makes us spiral and go faster. So it makes it trickier to get through it.
I've experienced a lot of what you're talking about, mainly the questioning, who I am and having trouble functioning around people in society. It's been many years, but to the point where I thought everybody went through that at some point. Can this, isn't that funny? Can this happen at any age in someone's life? It also sounds like a spirit or a Saturn's return.
Well, I was wondering for you, like if you track it, was it happening over multiple years? Was it a certain age? Was there like a big experience that happened and all of a sudden like it started coming through afterwards? How do you track that for yourself?
Yeah, it was mostly late 20s.
Okay. Okay.
That was like the bulk of it, but I'd say a little bit before, a little bit after, kind of maybe that integration period and getting grounded again.
Mhm.
Because yeah, I definitely felt like I was, out of my body for a bit and just,
Mm.
I don't know if maybe I didn't feel safe in my body or what. I did have one, session with somebody who I don't even know what you would call her, but basically we had a session where my soul, maybe it was a soul retrieval.
Mm.
So my soul came back into my body and it was something I'll never forget.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it had left at some point.
Okay. I'm so glad that you're sharing that too, because I think you're right around like the questioning of like, does everyone experience this or like, how does it happen? And it makes sense if you're talking ages like 28 to 30, right? 27 area where the Saturn return, because it is a huge time of what about meaningful work and purpose and how do I show up in that? And it's huge on this planet. Like, who are you? What are you going to do? Like, how do you support yourself? So there's that extra pressure. So it sounds like something was happening there. But I wonder, I don't know how you like there's a lot of different types of like soul retrieval, like energy work. And I almost think of like the soul as being, oh, this might be kind of silly, almost like a glass of water in some ways. Like the soul is sort of this like essence in the glass. And sometimes when we experience traumatic experiences, it's like part of the soul leaves to actually maintain like to maintain its consistency. And so I have seen before where people will do soul retrievals and they'll get these like really big important pieces back that left, whether it was through trauma, whether it was through I guess a lot of the times it's through trauma that the soul leaves, because in psychology they call it like dissociating. And in a lot more earth-based traditions, they'll say soul loss, where the soul actually goes away over time if it's not, if we don't feel safe enough for it to inhabit the body. So again, you might have had different things go on in life, but it's beautiful that it sounds like you got some really important pieces back that like clicked in so that you could be embodied here on the planet, which is really huge.
How do you combine spiritual practices with psychological approaches to address anxiety and stress?
Yeah, that's a big one too. It's kind of like I tend to be like in the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and energy healing. Again, it feels like modern psychology, like psychotherapy, is a lot more regulated than it was when it began. Like psychotherapy when it began was a lot more like experimental, even on like the harmful side, like I will say, with like Freud. And we learned a lot from him, but I think he caused a lot of harm in how he viewed and like felt prejudice and oppression towards women as well. And so like the history of like psychotherapy and mental health I think starts off a little rocky, but when you get into the 70s when it was still really new and people were called shrinks and things like that, there was a lot more experimentation, I think, around some of the practices like more embodied, like Gestalt. I don't know if you've ever heard of Gestalt before, but, or even like kind of internal systems, like family systems. There's just a lot more openness around the soul and meditation, especially like in the 70s. And then into like the 80s and the 90s, I think it got more and more regulated and more nuanced around like what therapists could do. And a lot of it was like to protect clients, to make sure, because as a therapist, there's so many rules and nuances you need to follow to make sure as people are healing things, they feel safe, from like communication patterns to dual relationships. And so it became more and more regulated to help people feel safe. In a way, like even as a therapist, if like a client gives me a gift, we have to have a whole conversation about like, thank you so much. And like, how does this mean for you? And sometimes like, I'm like, you know, would you like to leave this in the office like every time you come in as a way to like experience yourself? I can't take it home with me, but like, so the reason I say all that is because as we become more regulated, the scope of like how you can practice in a way has been very, very narrow. And I feel like only in the last like 10 years or so when meditation and mindfulness has become actually a researched scientific studying like neurobiology and like what happens in the brain. Is it becoming this accepted way that we can work with anxiety and depression in a holistic way that's not just like CBT based? So, like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is so much around getting aware of your thoughts and what you're thinking, and again, awareness. But I can't tell you how many folks I have that come to me that are like, I've been in therapy since I was 12. I can tell you why I'm thinking it, where it comes from, the traumas I have, the patterns, right? They can talk, they have a whole blueprint on like what happened. But I'll say, and can you let it go? Can you let the energy go? And they're like, no, like I can't. I can tell you, but I just fight with myself in my brain the entire time, basically. And so, working with anxiety and depression, working with anxiety at its core is what if, right? If we were to dumb anxiety down as small as we can get it, it's what if over and over and over again. What if this happens? What if that happens? And what if is just a form of fear. And usually if you ask someone who's anxious, do you feel connected to yourself right now? Most people say no. I'm not connected to anything. I'm like out in the ethers like a kite, just like up here wondering, and then my body is responding because my body loves me and is listening. It's listening to your brain and it's going into sort of, you know, high stress states in response, thinking that something's not okay or something's not right. And then depression in itself, again, is the core energy of I'm not enough or I don't trust myself. And again, you're usually not plugged into yourself either. So a lot of therapy modalities have been like, how do we think about this differently? How can we retrain your brain to think about this? And there's a lot of merit to that. I won't even say some, there's a lot. Affirmations, noticing patterns, but working with it holistically, bringing in meditation, bringing in mindfulness again is this sort of slowing down and not only being aware of what's going on, but giving yourself permission to let it go. And permission is the hardest thing for people to work for or work with. It's like, how do I write my permission slip to let energy go? And a lot of times people learn permission through ease. They learn permission through what would it be like to allow right now or to be in joy. And so holistically, when I'm combining these things together, if someone's working with anxiety, we're doing inner child work and kind of going in somatically and seeing like, where don't I have permission in the body to let this go? Where is it stored? Where can we bring healing? And this is sometimes people have guides or ancestors or, you know, beings of light that they work with, and we start getting them in relationship again through like guided imagery practices, and then we practice plugging them into those things. So a lot of it is they have the awareness about what's happening, but rather than arguing with themselves, how can we go into the body and actually bring healing and awareness into the body so it has permission to let those things go in a deeper way. Does that make sense here? Again, a little bit like I'm weaving a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so different traumas store in different areas of the body.
It feels like from my experience, people like have fanny packs like that they carry sort of in the body. It seems like a lot of people, especially a lot of women, it's always in the throat. It's always in like the throat, more of the fifth chakra area. My sensitive people, it's always in the gut. It's like learning how to really digest energy and how that shows up in gut health and nutrition and things like that. People carry it in the shoulders a lot of the time. I've yet for someone to say they carry it in like their calf. I've never heard someone say that before. People carry it in the knees. It seems like there's these places that we learn how to tense, and there's these patterns that develop in the body, you know, with fascia, with muscles, of how like we hold certain things. And so when we go to those places and we bring permission and ease, the body naturally starts unwinding itself. I think that's why a lot of people go to massage to kind of like push through those things. But I think if you bring awareness and breath and open and permission to the body, the same thing can start to happen if you let the body do what it is totally capable of doing. We just usually don't have awareness and permission of like where it's getting stored. Yeah.
I have one final question for you, but before I ask it, is there anything that we have not covered that you'd like to share?
I think we've covered a lot. I think we've covered, yeah. I think the only thing I might say is that if you have people that are listening to this podcast that are going through their own form of spiritual awakening, whether it's Saturn return, whether it's spiritual emergencies, whether it's like, how do I trust my intuition, all of those questions, the goal is the best thing you can do for healing is to start asking, whether it's guides, whether it's like yourself, whether it's like the universe, whoever, God, it's to ask to be reflected of like who you actually are. A lot of the process is just remembering who you are. A lot of people are working really hard to heal. And again, we talked about to be in joy on the journey is important, but if you can remember who you are, the things that aren't you naturally fall away. You don't have to like chisel them away. You don't have to like burn them. You know, if there are practices that help you, but like the goal is if you can really sit in and remember who you are, the journey gets a lot easier. Your body naturally starts letting go of all of these ideas, patterns, things you piled on. And that can be a scary process, but if it's done with love, it can happen a lot more holistically, I guess. So it's the last thing I'll say on that matter.
What is your number one health tip? So whether that's diet, mindset, nutrition, physical, emotional, just the one piece of advice you would like everyone to know.
Ah, oh man, this is so dorky. My brain came up with it and I was like, that's what we're gonna say. And I was like, is there anything else? And then it's just crickets. So we're just gonna have to go with it. But
Mhm.
and when I like human to human to human, whether it's a therapy person, whether it's like a psychic meditation, like coaching person across the board, when you're doing deep internal healing work, whether it's on the body, whether it's mental health, a lot of letting and supporting the body is like no one is drinking enough water and no one is drinking water that has minerals in it. A lot of people are not allowing the body and the cells as they're going through these processes to detox and let go. I keep watching people not drinking enough water, and if they're drinking water, it doesn't have the minerals in it anymore that people need for the body to actually absorb and hydrate and things like that. So, as dorky as it is across the board, when I start seeing people drinking water actually and making efforts around those things, so many beautiful things start to happen in every single sphere. And it's so basic. We're told this from like when we're small. And for some reason, like very few people actually do it. And so, even my folks that have trouble like digesting, I'll be like, how do you feel about warm water? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, so you're working on digesting. Like a lot of times it seems like if you put your hand on your belly or your womb, is it cold? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, we need to bring warmth. We need to bring like movement. We need to bring like soothing. Like, can you just start drinking water, enough of it with minerals, but can you do warm water? And they'll come and be like, my digestion is like so much better and my anxiety went down. I'm like, isn't that crazy? It was literally just water. So this is nerdy. And there's probably way more tips that are probably more wooey that I could come up with, but that's what my brain's got for you.
That's what people needed to hear. Whoever listening to this, they needed to hear that. And it's funny because it's the simple things that we don't, I mean, if we just did these simple things, it's amazing what a huge difference they make in how we feel.
100%. 100%.
Thank you so much for your time, Xandra, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your experience and your wisdom with everyone listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please remember to subscribe and come back next week for another one.